everyone, in this video we're going to be making bread machine bread, and normally I'm not one that likes appliances that only do one thing, but I have to say there is something in a machine that you put some ingredients in, press play, and 3 hours later you've got bread. I got this machine probably 6 or 7 years ago at Ollie's Bargain Outlet. And if you haven't been to Ollie's, Ollie's is legit. If you go in there, they've got like such cool stuff. It's really, really cheap. And they are definitely good stuff cheap. I got this bread machine for $30, and a lot of times I will just throw the ingredients in and I will have bread a couple hours later. One thing is that there's some changes we're going to make to this based on what the original recipe is and based on what the directions say, because just based on what I know about food and the way that machines work, we're going to change things up a little bit just to make it work a little bit better. I talked to a lot of people about the fact that they have bread machines and they just don't do what they want them to do. So we're going to do some things that are going to make sure that it works every time, and that's going to help you out a whole lot.
So if you get the Breadman machine, it comes with these recipes, and we are making a couple of slight changes to the bread machine recipe. It's going to start out with 1.5 cups of water. The recipe originally said 80 to 90 degrees. We're doing 100 to 110 just to make sure that yeast is kick-started. 3 tablespoons of unsalted butter. The original directions say to have it cut into pieces. If you have it just softened, that'll be just fine. A tablespoon of sugar to get that yeast jump started, 3 tablespoons of dry skim milk powder, 4 cups of bread flour, which we might need to adjust, 1.25 teaspoons of salt, and 2 teaspoons of yeast. In the original directions, the salt was a little higher up in the list, but I always put the salt in after the flour just so that we have that insurance policy so that the salt doesn't come in direct contact with the yeast so it doesn't kill it. To begin with, you're going to put your water, your yeast, and your sugar into the container of your bread machine. Make sure you've got the little thing inserted in the bottom that is the mixer. It looks like a little flap, but that is very important to make sure you have that in there to begin with. And I always take a whisk and stir this up just so that you are making sure that that yeast is hydrated a little bit. If your yeast is a little bit old and you're not sure if it's going to work, I will let this sit for a little bit just to make sure that it starts bubbling and that it is working. So this is where you can make sure that your yeast is working. If it doesn't bubble after about 10 minutes, you might need to go out and get some fresh yeast. I'm not doing that this time because I've used this yeast pretty recently, so I know it's going to be working pretty well. But if, like I said, if you haven't used your yeast in a while, that's a good way to check. And then after you have gotten that incorporated a little bit, then you are going to add your other ingredients. And I add those pretty quickly. Just flip your butter in, and that is your dried milk powder, and then your flour. It is a good idea with this to measure out your ingredients ahead of time, even if you're just pulling all of them out of the cabinet and just moving them from left to right as you measure them in so that you don't forget stuff like salt or the dried milk or that kind of thing, because it does make a pretty big difference to leave an ingredient out, especially the salt. The salt is going to make it taste a little bit better and not make it taste as flat. So then you are going to close the lid of your bread machine and set it to white bread for the 2-pound loaf. There are all sorts of little presets on here, but you're just going to hit select, and white bread is the top one, and then kind of click it until you get to your 2-pound, and then click start. I do this loaf quite a bit, so it is on there pretty well. And then make sure that your flour is moving, because if it's not, your little mixer thing might not be seated correctly. And so you always want to make sure your flour is moving, otherwise you're just going to have a pile of not mixed up ingredients at the end of the process. So I always kind of make sure it's moving well, and then you are good to go to let it keep moving. So this is one of those things that I do to kind of change the process up a little bit. After 10 minutes, I always check to make sure that everything is mixed and that the bread is cleaning the sides of the pan. If it is not, watch my other videos. You can add a little water if it's looking dry, or add a little flour if it's not cleaning the edge and it's looking sticky, and that's going to help you end up with the ideal loaf of bread. But you might need to adjust a little bit at this stage, and it's worth it to make sure that you end up with a good product, and you do that after about 10 minutes. And then about an hour in, we've got this nice pretty loaf of bread that is rising beautifully. Just as a side note, this loaf ended up rising a bit more than I expected and collapsing a little bit. I ended up putting a little bit more yeast than I should have in it, but it still ended up tasting delicious and ended up being really good. But as you can see, this loaf is rising perfectly. And this is going to follow the procedure just like you would if you were making any other dough. So this is going to be kind of your punching down stage of making your dough. So after it's nice and fluffy, it's going to rotate around a little bit to punch the dough down. Then it's going to do its final rise. So once your bread is cooled off a little bit in your pan, you're going to grab the bottom and turn that out. And the little beater is going to come out in there. The easiest way I found to pop that out is to use a butter knife and pull that out of the middle of there. And you will always have a little hole in the bottom of the loaf, but it doesn't affect things a whole lot. And you always want to use a bread knife to cut bread and use that sawing motion, and you end up with this nice gorgeous loaf of bread that is going to taste better than most of your regular loaves of bread. As you can see, the crumb of that is very even and nice, and you're going to end up with an amazing loaf. So if you're looking for a way to have fresh baked bread without spending a lot of effort and just being able to throw the ingredients in and press play, I highly recommend a bread machine. And like I mentioned, Ollie's is a great place to get them. I'm wondering if places like TJ Maxx or Ross might have them as well, or just pull that one out of your cabinet that you might have just had just sitting there. Thank you so much for joining us on Mixing with Merks, and let us know in the comments if you have a bread machine, if you've tried it out, and what your favorite things to make in your bread machine are. Don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell so that you know when our new videos are coming out, and we'll see you next time.